Hi there, welcome back. Forgive the delay for part two, but I certainly didn't foresee starting the new year off with having yet another major surgery. It's absolutely necessary, but I'm going to talk about more of that later. For now, I want to get this part out because it is part two, when the lie stops working. Remember, part one asked, how far will a lie take you? For instance, your identity, your story, or maybe the mask you're wearing. Part two answers, what happens when a lie stops working, when reality closes in, when control slips, when the truth can no longer be managed. This is where pride turns into pathology. So, a pattern you can't ignore. Across very different people, careers, and crimes, the pattern is the same. The lies begin as a way to survive, to impress, to belong, or to control. It grows because it works. When exposure threatens, the response isn't remorse, it's escalation. This is not desperation, this is entitlement, even. Let's start with Daniel Holtzclaw. Authority equals power and permission. Daniel Holtzclaw once carried a badge. He built his lie behind his badge. As an Oklahoma City police officer, he used authority as a camouflage. Uh, Selecting vulnerable women, counted on counting on fear, disbelief, and the system itself to protect him. His victims were dismissed, doubted, and ignored until the pattern became undeniable. That badge he once carried gave him access, authority, and instant credibility, even, and he used it as a cover while on duty as an Oklahoma police officer. He raped 8 women, targeting those he believed would not be believed, right? When the lie collapsed, it didn't stop the crimes, it exposed them. He was forced into retirement and sentenced to 237 years in prison after being convicted of multiple charges. Still, the most I overheard was a forced oral charge and rape committed while on duty, even. A job meant to protect became a hunting ground. Now, next is Lisa Montgomery. Obsession and entitlement. Then comes the reality, though, even to Lisa Montgomery. She wanted a baby so badly that she decided the lie had to be protected at any cost. She went as far as cutting one out of another woman's full term expectant body. Lisa Montgomery met Bobby Jo Stennett, a young woman pregnant with her first child, online, posing as someone who wanted to buy one of her puppies. She used that lie to gain access. After assaulting and suffocating Bobby Jo, she performed a crude C-section and took the baby. Bobby Jo was pushed aside and left to bleed to death. Because to Montgomery, once she got what she wanted, the body no longer mattered. But the body she discarded was not an object, it was a warm and loving person. Bobby Joe had a nursery ready. She was excited. She was preparing for this new life, not knowing someone else had decided her life was even expendable so that a lie could continue. Take a sip of juice. Yummy. All right. Lisa Montgomery, though, was sentenced and later even executed by the federal government. The lie did not save her, it consumed her. Then let's cover a little on Angela Simpson. This is when exposure becomes pride and entitlement, or excuse me, entertainment. Angela Simpson represents another level of sickness, I'd say entirely. She believed she could get away with it. In August of 2009, in Phoenix, she lured Terry Neely, a 46-year-old paraplegic man who rode around in a wheelchair, into an empty apartment with promises of sex and drugs. According to Angela Simpson, he claimed to be an informant and was pleased about putting people behind bars. Believing he was a snitch. Oh, no, I'm sorry. What followed was a 3-day torture of Angela, believing he was a snitch and deserved the following. He was beaten, he was stabbed over 50 times, had a nail driven into his skull, his teeth were removed, forced to watch his own suffering even in a mirror in the bathroom, then strangled and dismembered. Simpson attempted to burn his remains in a trash bin behind a halfway house next door. Unable to fully separate or hide the body parts, she still thought no one would know. She was wrong. When she realized she'd been caught, she flipped the script. Instead of hiding, she began to perform. She laughed, she gloated, she gave graphic details. She called for interviews. The crime became a story. The attention became the reward. The attention became fuel. The story became a performance. When hiding failed, pride took over and now even remains. Angela Simpson was sentenced to life in prison. When the lie stopped working, she didn't collapse. She revealed who she was, even all along. Then, one of my favorites, Stephanie Lazarus, The Lie That Waited Decades. Stephanie Lazarus showed us something just as chilling. She committed murder and then lived inside the lie for decades. She built a career right along with her crime and cover up. She wore authority. She blended in. This LAPD detective, Stephanie Lazarus, was unmasked by her own colleagues for the murder of her ex lover's new wife, a crime committed 26 years earlier. When crime rates dipped and active cases dwindled, senior officers tasked detectives with revisiting cold cases. It was in the process that Lazarus' hidden crime resurfaced. Knowing initially as a dedicated art theft investigator for 25 years, her facade held firm until she was finally confronted. When detectives re examined the cold case, they uncovered new evidence that pointed back to her. A bite mark on the victim is unusual in a burglary. On a hunch, they began to watch Stephanie as they gathered the DNA from the crime scene, then waited to compare it to Stephanie's once retrieved. It wasn't that long while watching her they were given that opportunity. After observing her throw away a disposable cup that they retrieved from the trash can, they sent both out to the lab for comparison. And wouldn't you know it, it was a match for Stephanie to be directly involved in the crime. When she was brought in for questioning, she remained unsuspecting and unarmed, as and her interrogation actually revealed not panic but a refusal to be seen. She began to be confronted. She resisted answering direct questions and even often changed the subject. Then it became clear in her body language as she was babbling on that she was uncomfortable, caught flat out lying, and often even shifted from acting shock to deflecting under the mask that didn't crack immediately. It slipped, glitched, it also reset. You see, because the lie had become her identity. I can't tell you how many times I watched her interrogation over and over again. You can see a clear view from the hidden camera recording her completely up close and personal. While they had begun waiting for the suspect, to be interviewed to arrive, the other two senior detectives accompanied her and began what they were actually there for. Those officers turned to Stephanie and began to ask her some questions. After all, her colleague, got her to come to an interrogation room to help with a new case. Was the ploy, which is a story that lured her in anyway. She was unsuspecting and unarmed. She had no idea that they had suspected her for the past couple of weeks. They dropped hints to her that they knew more about her personal life, history, and the crime that she committed that she uh, wasn't prepared for. They set up this, interview with her to see if she would confess. They got an opportunity to her to be without her weapon because, you see, detectives wishing to interview suspects have to turn them over before going into the interrogation room. She began to stutter, deny, and deflect on how she even knew John and their history. When this, by the way, was the guy she was clearly obsessed with for more than 25 years. They drilled her on the witness statements till she finally admitted to having a confrontation even with uh, John's girlfriend at this point, who then turned into his wife at the hospital where she worked, right before she showed up at their house and murdered her. Stephanie goes on to claim that she and John had an on and off again sexual relationship even for years. And after John was engaged, still too, right before the wedding even. She goes on, though, to confirm the details of how much she called him to invite him to go on vacation with her in the midst of all of her talking in circles about him, clearly showing she was, in love with this man and obsessed with him in a relentless, though toxic way. Even after he had made his choice, to get engaged and then marry another woman. So she should be murdered for being his bride because that is what happened. And she retaliated so quickly after they were married, allegedly, as the evidence shows. The detectives, though, laid into her directly, which led up to either revealing or confirming all of their relationship. It must have felt more like teeth pulling, though, because she kept talking instead of just answering the questions they asked. What you can also see in her interrogation is when she begins to panic, trying to keep going with the storytelling. She ended the interview by saying, "Hey, I know how this stuff goes with all this questioning. I mean, I'm paraphrasing here." But it went on to say, or she did, "You guys said we were supposed to be talking to a suspect, but you are in here grilling me about a man I dated about 1,000 years ago. If you're trying to pin his wife's murder on me, well, then I have a problem with that, and I'm going to have to talk to someone." It's her refusing to be seen. Lazarus was later convicted of the murder of 29-year-old Sherry Rasmussen, the director of nursing at Glendale Adventist Medical Center, who was married to John Rutten, a man with whom she had confessed to being unable to leave him alone. It did start years ago, and in her eyes, never ended. She was in love with him and had even told her close relatives so many times, too. CBS, my local news station, covered her parole hearings because they happened in Los Angeles and I live in San Diego. They reported that Stephanie Lazarus, now 64, was sentenced to 27 years to life in a state prison back in 2012, uh, 3 years after she was arrested, and more than 26 years after the murder, which happened in 1986. Lazarus confessed to the crime, but only in 2023 during her request for parole, which was initially granted but revoked after California Governor Gavin Newsom expressed concerns, which included the fact that she evaded justice, he says, for more than 2 decades and did not appear to begin taking full accountability for the murder until she was finally caught and up for parole, even. It makes me sick to this day, she had quoted in that parole hearing, that I took an oath to protect and serve people, and I took Sherry Rasmussen's life from her, a nurse. Lazarus had said, according to a transcript from 2023 parole hearing, but much like you, I'm sure you're going to be convinced, like I am, that it sounds like, her quoting or her saying pretty much anything she could think of because she wanted out, right? Not necessarily to face any responsibility. But all I could think about was getting out of there before the police showed up, is what she ended it with. That sickness here is not impulsive, it's even rehearsed. Um, so we come to the pattern, right? These cases are not the same. However, they are connected. Some people love their position because it allows them to commit crimes while being paid and protected. Some demand what they want at any cost. And some, when finally exposed, turn truth into theater because being seen feels better than being forgotten. When the lie stops working, people don't always respond the same way. Some repent, some collapse, and some reveal their true nature without shame. Be wise, I say, because just like many, before you can either save yourself or sink yourself. This is the moment this lesson leaves us with the common thread. These stories aren't about gender, they're not about profession, they aren't even about intelligence. They are about pride fused with entitlement. When the lie works, it feeds. When it stops working, it demands blood, bodies, or a spectacle, even. Um, my final thought here, um, a lie may carry you far, but when it begins to collect victims, it collapses. It then even takes everything with it. And the truth always comes out, right? Not as mercy, but as exposure, even, too. All right, guys. Hope you liked it as much as I did. See you soon. Bye.